through.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning to all the honourable members who are online this morning. Chairperson, I am together with Ms. Kibi Manana, who will be doing the presentation. Ms. Manana is the Acting Director General of Deputy Director General of Public Transport. And she will be doing the presentation this morning. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We have anyone from Treasury in this meeting?
Good morning, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning to the honourable members, and good morning to the Minister and colleagues from the DOT. Honourable Chair, my name is Ulrika Britton. I am the Deputy Director General for Public Finance in the National Treasury. And with me on the call is the public finance team who works on the transport budget. I have Luyolo Nkangula, who will co-present with me, and then the analysts who also does all this work, Risejo Tecanyo and Chloe Weingard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. We note your presence here. We'll start with the presentation from department. They said Ms. Kibi Manana is the one who's going to do that. Just before she comes in, just to indicate that we are requested because this meeting has generated interest and members want to see who's speaking. If we can all have cameras when we speak, only those will be speaking. Thank you very much. Camera on, please.
Good morning. May I introduce the presentation?
Yes, the Honourable Minister, give the background.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I think the presentation that we are going to give today arises in the context of a public transport network grant that was established several years ago to provide a particular form of public transport in cities. And this grant was primarily focused on infrastructure and then secondarily on operations. But unfortunately, it has for a very long period of time been an underperforming grant in the sense that it has not achieved the objectives for which it was established. And after more than 15 years, we find that there are really only two partially successful operations. The one is in the Western Cape, the My City Bus, which I think is, of all the operations, the more successful one. And then the other one is in Gauteng, in the city of Joburg. And between the two situations, they are carrying about 147,000 passengers on a daily basis. Now, I'm citing this figure, Honourable Chair, because we would understand that other forms of transport are moving a lot of passengers. So if one can look at, for example, the taxi industry, one would find that the taxi industry is probably moving about 8 million passengers a day. So I think that we can see that this grant has not been is not achieving the results that it was originally intended to achieve. And because of that, there was a decision by Cabinet that this grant should be wound down over a period of 3 years. I think what is important to say at the outset is that the wind down period allows us to complete existing commitments. And we are currently with both cities and provinces on the possibility of repurposing this grant. Honourable members would be aware that for a very long time, there have been attempts within the Department of Transport to look at how we make public transport more affordable to commuters. Unfortunately, options that have been considered have not been funded. And really, there are only two significant forms of commuter support. The one would be through the passenger rail, PRASA, and the other would be through what we call the PTOC, which is the bus subsidies. Those bus subsidies themselves are subject to controversy because the Auditor General has found that these are evergreen contracts that have existed for a very long period of time and are only benefiting certain companies. So it is in that context that we have had a discussion, myself, together with the Minister of Finance, on the possibility of reforming the existing public transport grants and using those grants in a manner that would more effectively support commuters. I think it's important to say, Chair, this is work in progress. And today we would not be in a position to share with the committee the final outcome of those consultation processes. But we do want to make sure that as we wind down the existing public transport network grant, we do not disadvantage routes that are functioning, and we do not disadvantage existing contractual obligations. And Ms. Manana will point to those issues that we are mindful of as we proceed with the consultation process. So I think in summary, what we want to say to honourable members is that we are winding down a grant that has existed for some time, that is not benefiting commuters, and we are trying to look at other alternatives that would be more beneficial to commuters, but we are not there yet from a policy point of view. Let me pause there and, with your permission, Chair, hand over to Ms. Manana, who will be making the presentation.
In that order, the Honourable Minister, thanks. You can come.
Thank you, Minister, and good morning to Chairperson and honourable members and colleagues, as well as everyone who is on the platform. As already introduced, I'm Kibi Manana, and I will be making the presentation on the winding down of the Public Transport Network Grant. Can we have the presentation on slide mode? As they put it on slide mode, the presentation will cover the following. We're going to provide reasons for the winding down of the grant. Secondly, we're also asked to touch on the implementation process of the winding down. And then lastly, we then give some slides focusing on the future approach that is still in discussion, as Minister has said, with provinces as well as municipalities. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so I've already touched on the contents of the presentation. Next slide. The department has consistently, urged municipalities to implement better and faster. And support has been given as well as oversight, because our role as a transferring officer is to monitor how the grant funds are spent. And despite the support that has been given to municipalities, we have developed templates. We would meet with them on an extensive basis, meet with them on a quarterly basis, arrange city-to-city peer review sessions. Despite all these interventions, we still have had limited effect on outcomes. We still had cities, all cities, including Cape Town as well, where deadlines were missed. We still have funds still wasted, and many cities have failed to improve their performance despite the support and the specific directives that they've been given. Hence, we've come to this conclusion that we need to wind down the grant and enter into a new regime. Can we go to the next slide? Next one. So most IPTNs across most of the cities, currently we have 11 municipalities that are receiving grant funds. And we would say they're underperforming. Even your Cape Town and George and others that are doing very well, they still have not met the target that they are supposed to have met, especially when you look at the amount of money that they have been or that has been dispersed to them. So in the presentation, we're highlighting the number of passengers that they are currently moving across all the 9 cities that are operating. We still have eThekwini and Sunduzi not yet operational, and most of these systems are operating at a pilot scale. So you will find that they are still at phase 1A, which is a pilot, and not really at the scale and the scope that they are required to be at. And also noting that taxis move 8 million daily passengers trips on a daily basis. So you have to juxtapose that 147 or 152 currently to 8 million daily passenger trips that are being made by the taxi industry. Can we move to the next slide? There have been persistent structural challenges, that have driven these poor outcomes and therefore then led to this decision to wind the grant down. And the first one, it's municipal capacity. Municipalities still lack the capability to plan and to implement and manage these systems. Industry transition, because the program was looking at transforming the taxi industry by forming vehicle operating companies. And we found that this reform agenda has been, you do have green shoots there and there, but largely there have been challenges related to the industry itself, the nature of the industry. And sometimes even where vehicle operating companies have been formed, they have been just their state of readiness. You find that they are not fully ready. Financial sustainability, where costs exceed revenue, and yet we still have low ridership impact. Because the program was both a focus on infrastructure and operations, you find that municipalities, it's easy to deliver infrastructure because it doesn't involve people. Then the focus tended to be more on over-designed infrastructure systems that are not fully backed by data, or either they are projections in their transport plan indicate that they're going to be moving so many numbers and that there should be congestion, but in reality, it is not. And lastly, issues around governance and compliance have also marred the system. Can we go to the next slide? A number of slides from henceforth are just unpacking these persistent challenges that I've highlighted. As I said, with local municipality capacity constraints, it's also been characterized by an over-reliance on large and expensive project management units of external consultants, and with no internal capacity being built, and also limited skills transfer taking place on the industry challenges. Also, because the nature of the taxi industry, you find that if they are fighting amongst themselves, that will definitely then impact the progress of the project. Can we move to the next slide? Affordability, you find that fare revenues are often overestimated due to over-optimistic passenger demand expectations or projections. There's also been mismanagement and misuse of funds where there have been forensic investigations taken. And on infrastructure and construction, I have indicated that there's just been an over-speccing of infrastructure that is being built, and still not being able to achieve, the spatial fragment, or rather not being able to address spatial fragmentation because it is quite complex. You find that where people live and where people work, it's far, and at a municipal level, there isn't integrated planning, and also there's poor infrastructure, contract management, as well as maintenance of that infrastructure. Next slide. On institutional issues, poor planning and governance comes up quite a lot. Uneven commitment to operationalize the system. Cities would rather continue building rather than operationalize. And also the lack of political will at a city level. Those matters have impacted the system. And lastly, on compliance and consequence management, most cities, you find they do not comply with grant conditions and the PTNG framework. And then the DORA legislation allows us to stop or withdraw or withhold. We would do that. But then these continue being persistent challenges despite, stopping and withholding grant funds. And this also resulted in some of the 3 municipalities being suspended from the grant a few years ago. Can we move to the next slide? So all in all, misalignment between expenditure and outcomes has been, one of the reasons for winding down the grant, as indicated by Minister as well, the fragmented funding architecture, that you find that you have a grant at a municipal sphere and another grant, the public transport operations grant, at a provincial sphere. And some of the services that are replaced at a municipal sphere are then competing with services that are being offered on the same route at a provincial sphere. You then also had cities, as I said, overemphasizing on capital funding rather than focusing on operations, moving passengers, and institutional capacity constraints being another challenge. And lastly, long-term financial costs that have been invested with poor returns. Can we move to the next slide? I think the next part now, we're going to discuss the winding down process. I think we recognize that the winding down has to be executed and managed carefully and in a considered fashion. And we want to make sure that even as we wind down, we save money and display fiscal prudence, that we do not allow for wastage to continue, and it's important that we then redirect resources to be spent more effectively and to effectively support commuters, as the Minister has said. Some of the undesired effects we want to avoid, we recognize that public transport is critical to move people to work or to schools, and therefore it supports economic activity in whatever way we manage
Ms. Manana,
Yes, sir.
you are losing connectivity now, and I think it will be problematic for our people who are recording and for our media guys. If you can try to be closer to the mic, I don't know what's happening. We were audible well, but now we are losing you.
Chair,
But
can
it-
I request she puts off her camera?
I'm not sure because our media guys requested that we be on camera. If you can just
But
set,
she's doing a presentation, so I'm sure people are looking at the presentation. I think there isn't a
If-
band.
it's fine if she can do that, and if it will enhance her audibility, it will assist us. If you can,
Thank you,
Ms.
Chair.
Manana.
I have also
Yeah,
moved
you are
closer
clear now.
to this.
Yes.
Okay, fine. And as I was saying, some of the undesired effects we want to avoid, it's contractual and legal challenges, recognizing that there are commitments and obligations that municipalities have entered into. We also recognize that with the winding down, this will erode trust between government and as a whole, even between government and the taxi industry that we're trying to transform. We need to therefore make sure that we do some damage control, and the issue of stranded infrastructure also has to be looked at so that we do not result with fruitless and wasteful expenditure. And that commuters must then have viable and better systems that they can depend on. Can you go to the next slide? We've also identified risks of the winding down process, as well as the transition as we move out of the PTNG into a new grant that is repurposed. The one risk is service continuity. We seek to make sure that in this phase transition, we protect core routes, as Minister has said, and that passengers then should continue to have services. Infrastructure and assets, we need to make sure that we repurpose those assets and reuse them with the remaining or new services that will come on board. Intergovernmental coordination, we have to also clarify roles and formalize coordination by using structures that have been prescribed within our legislation. And also, when we transition from the winding down, we recognize that the risk of reform delivery, that as we come up with a new reform agenda, we have to make sure that this is not undermined by the wind down process, and link transition clearly to this new model. Funding certainty is also a critical factor, and it's one matter that we have to make sure that we send clear signals and certainty around funding, and we're working with Treasury on these issues. And lastly, fiscal mismatch. We recognize that there may be commitments, and one of the slides that we will show where we've got these committed obligations or contractual obligations, and therefore we need to navigate this process carefully to make sure that those commitments are met. And this will require us to prioritize, to renegotiate, as well as align the budget. Can we go to the next slide? We started communicating with municipalities already in August because we meet with municipalities a number of times during the year. Already in August, we signaled to them that this is on the table, and the grant looks like will be cut, and the cut most likely will be a 30% cut. But then as we continue to engage with them, we also in October wrote to municipalities, basically then informing them officially that the grant will be cut. There was also a meeting with them where we highlighted this directive, and then the Minister of Finance then also announced as part of the budget statement that there will be a cut, and we continue to meet with municipalities. In January, we then also requested them to submit to us contractual obligations and as well as implementation plans in March this year. And we had a workshop in April and another workshop in May. And we also then are planning to have another workshop on the 4th to the 5th of June. Okay, no. The 4th to the 5th of June, it was a workshop with Treasury. And also we have another workshop with Treasury on the 8th to the 9th, also talking about the winding down process and the new fund that will be developed. And we also then lastly plan to continue engaging with municipalities in June. And our engagements will continue throughout the year because we recognize that this is a path that has not been, people have not walked on before. Therefore, we need to make sure that there's communication, and we have also engaged with Treasury that there needs to be a consistent communication between ourselves as national departments, so that then the message is very clear in terms of how we will manage the winding down process. Next slide. I think as Minister already indicated, the winding down process will take place over a period of 3 years, starting this year. And this slide basically highlights that over this 3 years, we need to then also look at that we honor obligations, and that we also then, if there are any projects as municipalities will be submitting, will continue to submit to us. We then engage with them, we give them feedback. Those projects that we are able to get out of, that we will then focus on those as well. And what is also important is within the 3 years, we've already started to look at a new public transport fund and as well as a new public transport plan that we are now discussing with municipalities. And municipalities have then, as well as provinces, have been requested to then make their input to influence how then do we come up with a plan that will make sure that we have an integrated system that is backed by integrated funding, that we're moving away from this fragmented funding where you have PTNG, PTOG, as well as the taxi recap program funded separately and not talking to each other. And the aim is to then consolidate these 3 funds over this period of the winding down. Next slide. This slide just unpacks the winding down process and framework. And firstly, it looks at the winding down process that we will follow. It then also just gives objectives during this transition process, and then highlights the roles that the Department of Transport as well as municipalities should be playing. When it comes to the winding down process, we will make sure that we assess the current contracts that we have for both the Public Transport Network Grant as well as the Public Transport Operations Grant, to make sure and explore the integration potential. And then we'll also assess the vehicle operating arrangements that are in place. We will also assess compensation and make sure that there is agreement in terms of roles and commitments, and develop joint operations plan that then will result in us executing the winding down process. And the objective is to make sure that we protect all the services that are currently operational, and where those routes are viable, we will not disrupt those routes. We'll also make sure that there is system that is improved system performance and ridership throughout this period. And we will also favor systems that will that are ready to operate. And this has already been communicated with municipalities where they've been asked, or they will also be asked to confirm launch dates so that we avoid wasting funds or failing systems, and also make sure that we respect all the legal obligations to avoid any legal risks, and make sure that going into the future, there is alignment between contracts that are already there, services that are there, and prioritize an integrated, flexible, multimodal public transport system that looks at also integrating the minibus taxi industry to improve the value for money and make sure that commuters get a better deal. Our roles are highlighted that the department will then continue to lead and monitor and capacitate municipalities where required, and that we are jointly finalizing principles for winding down with National Treasury, and to make sure that these then also influence the decisions that we will take when it comes to contractual obligations. And cities have already issued, or rather given us information in terms of the contractual obligations they have, and where there is infrastructure, we have to look at how we repurpose that infrastructure, and where there is potential for PPPs, we will also need to look at how then do we look at this going forward. And basically the new regime will look at making sure that we've got an integrated multimodal hybrid systems, and cities with provinces will have to implement these. Moving to the next slide. Municipalities have submitted their contractual obligations. As we will see from the slide, their commitments that they have submitted are outlined in terms of the next 3 years, but also they go beyond the MTF, and this is largely as a result of the vehicle operating agreements that municipalities have entered into with the vehicle operating companies, because these are 12-year contracts. Hence, as you will see that from the table, some of the commitments that are about, I think about 17 billion that we then have to honor beyond the next 3 years. Next slide. This slide just highlights the different commitments, that these are long-term contracts and they are operationally critical, and those matters we will have to look at. And you also find that they are centered in most of the larger cities. And as I indicated, they include what we call vehicle operating company contracts. And there are contracts where cities are continuing to build. For example, the city of Cape Town, the infrastructure is funded through the BFI, Budget for Infrastructure Facility. And so we need to look at then how do we continue to honor commitments like that. So this slide just highlights all the commitments across the different cities and the amounts as well. Can we go to the next slide? Or the value of the contracts. Now, going into the future, I think one of the critical elements that is key to what we seek to do in repurposing these different grants is to make sure that they don't continue as multiple grants that offer overlapping services, and also that offer services that are competing with each other, but that we then integrate the grants to offer an integrated service that is then funded through a single fund with a unified set of standards, as well as performance incentives for public transport service delivery. And then also we are moving from a system that was very heavy infrastructure focused into operations led, where then the focus will be making sure that contracts that are being finalized would then focus on the movement of passengers rather than spending money on infrastructure. Thirdly, we're moving away from compensation-led approaches where there are existing compensation agreements. These will be honored, but going into the future, we are seeking to come up with a new model that then moves away from compensation, but that we make sure that operators are contracted and are then offered an opportunity to operate services within this integrated network. And lastly, the taxi recap program will be concluded. The existing pipeline of projects would then be closed out, and the funds would then be repurposed into de-risking the taxi industry, where we will collaborate with financial institutions to make sure that the vehicles are affordable and that the industry is then formalized, and issues around right sizing of the industry are looked at, and from a regulatory perspective, that operating license compliance are also matters are also addressed. Next slide. We then indicate that we've already started to engage with various stakeholders. We had a bilateral with National Treasury. We are still going to have a workshop next week, and there will be a follow-up workshop with municipalities and provinces. They have been requested to submit written comments, and they've already done that. The comments are trickling in, and also we will engage with the industry and other key stakeholders, and this will then largely result in a cabinet submission as the last step in the process. And the aim really is to make sure that we come with a reform agenda and program that then will generate better value for money, and also making sure that we give a better and effective service for commuters. Last slide. I think this summarizes the process. We're just highlighting that where we're starting is we need to make sure that we validate and finalize contractual obligations across all cities, and make sure that we confirm operating infrastructure and compensation commitments with municipalities and provinces when we look at the public transport operations grant. And then we will then work clearly with municipalities to jointly develop wind down plans, and that process has started. And this will be informed by core corridors or routes that are profitable that need to be retained. And the non-performing elements must then be phased out, and these must then be aligned with the contractual as well as funding constraints. We will then confirm forward funding envelopes with Treasury, where then it becomes very clear in terms of what funding will then be available. And we seek to make sure that there is stabilization in the process. As we said, we need to tread carefully and manage this transition process, where we provide clear direction to municipalities and make sure that where negotiations with the operators have started, we need to then navigate that to see how we conclude those processes to avoid disruption of existing services as well. And then lastly, we should be coming up with a public transport fund that is then repurposed to make sure that it focuses more on operations first model rather than building infrastructure, and also maximizes integration of opportunities across the public transport network grant, the public transport operations grant, as well as the taxi recap program. Next slide. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, thank you very much. Let me just say that I am going to request to leave at 11:30, Chair. So perhaps if there are specific questions for me, I could answer them before I go. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Yeah, we understand you will have to leave. You want to leave at what time? At 11:30?
11:30.
Okay, it's fine. I think the Treasury presentation may not be long. Let's take it, and from there, we'll allow questions to come in, and we'll start with you so that if we are to release, we can release you when we are done. If Treasury can come in quickly.
Chair, please confirm if my screen is visible.
We can see you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we can see your presentation, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Chair, I mean, this presentation really focuses on the numbers and it highlights some of the challenges that Ms. Manana had presented on early on. So this kind of gives us the evidence base for what it is that we have done and why we did what we did. This presentation, so I'm going to start with just the budget approach and how we got to specifically the Public Transport Network grant. And as a program for targeted savings. We then go into just explaining the evolution of the funding framework. And I think it's important to understand as the program evolved, how the funding framework changed with this. Mr. Nklangula is going to then present on the performance and the assessment, and then I'll just touch on some of the next steps that we have. So, honorable members, this comes out of work. I mean, the approach to the budget that we had taken for the 2026 medium-term expenditure framework really started in work that we had undertaken in 2024 when we did a review of the budget process. And what we found within the budget process was that it was largely a compliance-driven process that was incremental. We just kind of built on what we had in baselines in previous years. It became about compiling the data as opposed to understanding strategically whether we were still meeting our objectives for the various programs that was being funded in the budget. And of course, what it really meant was that the assumptions that we had made when we initially designed the process wasn't necessarily true about this incremental growth within budgets. So in the good times in the early and mid 2000s, where we would have space for additional funding, we didn't have that for a long time, which meant that we weren't assessing and making the trade-offs in the right way. And as a result of that, all that arose out of the budget process was we would do these across the board spending cuts. We would continue to having spending pressures on frontline services. Budget risks were expanding. So this would just be on budget and off budget across the public sector. And it was really just a data compilation process, and we were adjusting for that. And then when we hit 2025 and we hit the 2025 budget, and this is really where it reinforced it. So when we had the two failed budgets, it reinforced the focus that we have to take on expenditure. And the focus on what we had in the budget and what was it at the time was just about 1.1 trillion rand of expenditure that we had in the appropriation bill, meant that we would have to look at what happens on expenditure slightly differently. And we'd embarked on a process where we looked at how do we define and identify and define what are these underperforming programs that don't meet these objectives. And we use what we call this multi-criteria analysis through the program assessment matrix. So the graphic on the right-hand side highlights some of the parameters that we then assess in trying to identify programs that were underperforming or that are low priority, that don't fit the institution well, etc. So when we talk about an underperforming program, we don't just talk about underspending. Underspending is one way to show that something is wrong, but that we were assessing a whole range of other parameters within how the program was designed, what it was costing us, what it was buying us, the institutional capacity to implement, and then also just look at what, from a fiscal risk point of view, whether this was affordable and what kind of was happening from a budget discipline point of view. in moving to how we got to the public transport network grant, I mean, as the minister had highlighted, the program was initially infrastructure focused, and that came out of the awarding of the 2010 World Cup, when one of the urban mobility legacy projects was around building this kind of infrastructure. So the public transport infrastructure fund that was initially set up to respond to the infrastructure needs that host cities would have is really where we all started with this program. And that was the focus, was on the host cities. And then we went to cabinet and had the public transport strategy initially approved, a draft approved in 2026 and the final one approved in 2027. And then on the back of that, we then created what we call the public transport infrastructure and systems grant. And as we evolved with this, and I mean, it's important to understand that the strategy, the public transport strategy, was approved by cabinet before we had the NLTA, the National Land Transport Act, enacted. So while there was a strategy that kind of framed where it was that we were going, the institutional framework to support all of that came a little bit later through the National Land Transport Act. But what I think is important is that as cities started launching and we got to got into the operational phases, we realized that this program can't just be about the infrastructure, it can't just be about infrastructure focus. And what we did in the budget was that we separated the public transport infrastructure grant from the operations component. We brought it back again because we realized we would need to move money between the two, and having to go through a legislative process through the Division of Revenue Act would be very difficult. But we've had challenges across the board here, and kind of the shifting of the grants, the renaming of the grants, the restructuring of the grants highlights some of these challenges that we had. On top of persistent continuous budget cuts that we had made, to start signaling that something is not working. So we always try to use the budget to signal that change needs to come. Sometimes the change happens, sometimes it doesn't. But more importantly, since the original framing of this in 2005 all the way to 2024-25, the budget had appropriated just under 95 billion rand for this program. 88 billion rand was transferred, and we had just over 75 billion rand spent. So in looking at all of this, using those metrics, we signaled in the budget at MTBPS that we will be scaling this down. And then, of course, in February, the budget then came in where we made the cut. A large chunk of that cut stayed within the Department of Transport's vote and was prioritized to rail to help process scale up and then give us the time between or at least national government the time to work on what this new plan for road-based public transport would look like. I'm going to hand over to Leolo. Please come in on this. And maybe we don't have to present on it, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you, DDG. Greetings to the chair, the honorable members, the Minister of Transport, colleagues from the DOT, and my colleagues from the National Treasury. So yeah, Chair, I think the program started with the 13 cities, and in 2018 we saw 3 cities suspended in the program. And I think the main reasons around the suspension of the cities in the program cuts across a number of reasons, such as the low preparedness in terms of implementing the program, the technical capacity within municipalities, the underperformance in terms of the grant itself, the issues around non-compliance with the grant conditions. And those 3 cities were mainly the Buffalo City, the Mbombela, and Msunduzi. And Chair, you will notice that Msunduzi was readmitted in the program following certain gates that were set for the city to be brought back into the program. Various cities are at different stages of implementation, some of them in phase 1 and some of them in phase 2A. And one of the, in fact, 2 of the cities that we saw performance is the Cape Town and the George, but they also came with their own challenges. And we've seen other cities in the Gauteng province, Ekurhuleni, city of Joburg, and city of Tshwane, also implementing some of the phases in the program. And we've also seen smaller cities like your Polokwane and your Mangaung and a city of Rustenburg also starting with operations. And I must say, Chair, that these cities, all of them have seen changing environments, and most of the delays were in relation to some of the changes in leadership within the cities, and also around the technical capacity and heavy reliance on consultants to assist the municipalities in implementing the program. If you can move to the next slide. So over time, Chair, and I think this is well documented even in the vote itself, the Department of Transport, we have seen a persistent underspending on this grant. And the period we looked into started from 2018 and 19 up until 2024 25. And over the 7-year period, we have seen a consistent underspending in the grant, averaging 29% underspending on the grant. You will see in the top table, it's showing the final appropriation and the funds transferred and what was actually spent within the municipalities. And you will see, Chair, there's the percentages of underspending varies across the cities. And if you were to ask me in terms of how the cities have been performing around this, I think over time, I mean, since the inception of the program itself, cities had ample time to sort of like recalibrate and relook into the system and see which ones, which areas are working and which areas are not working within the system. And the table at the bottom is actually showing the spending per city and the related underspending across all the cities. You do find some of the cities that were spending on par in terms of what was allocated or transferred to the municipality, and some of the municipality continues to significantly underspend. And if I were to just highlight one or two, I mean, you will see in Johannesburg, I mean, there is consistent underspending throughout the years, I mean, ranging from 32% underspending all the way to 61% over time. And I think the cities that you see there highlighted in red are the ones that are not operational. Therefore, they are not receiving any transfers at this point. So this consistent underspending, I mean, it's one of the issues we've been raising as well with the department to say, we do not think that the program itself is as efficient as it's supposed to in comparison to what we are seeing in terms of the underspending. Next slide.
So, Chair, I mean, the analysis that we're going to be sharing with you today is based on the operational plans that is a requirement in the grant in terms of the Division of Revenue Act. In that operational plans, there are details in what we call Appendix 3 that sets out very specific expenditure components. And so what we've done is we've reconstructed a time series of each of the city's annual operational plans that they provide. It's important for me to say that this is a planning document, and performance wasn't necessarily tracked against the plan at that lower level. Performance, like in all of our conditional grants, and we've just done a review around all of this, and at least our infrastructure conditional grants, is where there's always a quite heavily focus on tracking performance against the budget versus tracking performance against the plan. And that's a general weakness that we have within the infrastructure reporting system that we are fixing. So this is fundamentally, I suppose, a disclaimer. So where you do see information gaps, it is because the focus has always been on the plan and not necessarily on tracking the actual performance in the subsequent plan to what was provided for in the way that they would have done it in the previous year. So one way, so whilst Leola has showed what was happening on the expenditure side, one way of tracking performance was looking at against the plan, was looking at what was happening on projected passengers and how how that then differs from actual passengers. And what the slide really shows is that, except in 2 cases, we've seen a significant underperformance around planned passengers versus what was actually on what the passengers who actually use the system. And it varies. And I think the important bit about the slide, for example, is that what you don't see is, as you're realizing that your actual and your plan doesn't come together, what you really want to see is these percentages come down and they converge because you're adjusting your planning framework to meet your actual performances. This is not the case here. It happened in Cape Town for a few years, and then COVID hit, and we struggle. So when you're seeing this kind of growing divergence, and that's really what we're showing here, is the growing divergence between what is happening from a planning point of view and an actual point of view. And as we were even getting more information about what was happening, this is a signal or a symptom that we weren't reforming or recalibrating our systems in a way that then reduces that number. And of course, Loyola.
Oh, thank you, DDG. So if you're looking at this slide here, Chair and honorable members and team, we've seen significant variations in terms of what was the budget revenue versus the outcome. And I must say, Chair, that in the time series that we created from those Appendix 3s from the municipalities, there were some gaps where you find that cities did not provide some of the revenue outcome numbers. But the picture we are painting here and what we have observed in terms of those operational plans is that cities have budgeted revenues, but none of the cities ever achieved what was actually budgeted in that particular period. And this looks at the overall picture in terms of the period we are looking into, which is 2017-18 to 2023-24. So you will see at the bottom there that cities budgeted 5 billion in revenues, but they only achieved 3.1 billion, resulting in a shortfall of 1.2 billion. Next slide. Again, I mean, the one thing that we have noticed around these operational plans and what the cities have been doing in the past, there has been some continued planning, especially around the planning cost in the system. And for a system that has been in place for such a long time, one would expect that at the early phases of the system itself, you will see significant costs going towards planning. However, as you start the phases and implementing the program itself, you see a reduction in terms of the planning cost. But this is not the case here. What we are seeing is that cities continue to spend on preparatory phases of the program, and most of the systems are still struggling with the operations, and yet they continue to budget planning costs and also incurring expenditure around that. You may notice in the table on the left there, which is something we agree with, especially with the city of Joburg, is that the budget for the planning costs is way, way lower compared to the other big cities, and the expenditure thereof is limited. And one would agree with this to say City of Joburg has been operating a number of phases, and therefore there is little spending on the planning cost side. And on the right-hand side, we are just plotting these numbers, the budget versus the actual expenditure. But the point here we are trying to make is that even in the planning documents that we looked into, there seems to be a trajectory of cities continuing to plan on the system. And this is worrisome because, as I have mentioned, we would expect cities to have incurred substantial amounts of planning costs at the beginning of the system itself. And I must say, Chair, as my DDG has indicated, these information gaps resulted in some of the years not having the full detail of the information, but it is our view that the picture we are painting here does not necessarily change, even if we were to fill in those gaps that we have in terms of the data we have. Next slide. Again, here, looking at this Appendix 3 that we worked with, the reported direct vehicle operating cost ratios fall outside the acceptable ranges. So what you often see here, Chair and honorable members, is that on the direct vehicle operating cost, you need to sort of like cover a certain amount of your revenue. And the acceptable range here is between 25 rands and 42 rands. And as you can see, the considerable portion of the reported direct vehicle operating costs, they fall outside of the range, suggesting an elevated cost relative to revenue kilometers. And again, I mean, this assessment is further constrained with the incomplete and inconsistent municipal data submissions. And again, Chair, as I said in my earlier slides, that cities had all the time to sort of like recalibrate and relook into these numbers and make sure that they fall within the acceptable ranges as per the industry norms. I mean, if you look, for instance, Ekurhuleni, I think started with the first phases of operations, but those numbers are quite high, suggesting that the vehicle operating costs are very high in comparison to the revenue generated by the city. Again, I mean, if you look at the cities that are not operating, you won't find any detail on that. And Nelson Mandela Bay, they started well, they were fitting within the acceptable range, but we are seeing in the last 2 years some significant variations in terms of those acceptable ranges, suggesting that the cities seem not to be well clued up in terms of what's happening with these numbers. And one would want to see consistency across the cities and just making sure that all the cities fall within the acceptable ranges. If you are outside of the acceptable range, then as a city, you have an opportunity to recalibrate the system to ensure that everything fits within the acceptable ranges. Next slide. Again, here we are seeing insufficient fair revenue that covers the vehicle direct operating costs. And I mean, the program itself was designed to assume that fares, revenue from fares will cover the direct vehicle operating costs. And in this case, we see fair revenue, as you have seen in my previous slides as well, in terms of the revenue collection. Fair revenue remained weak across all cities relative to the operational costs. And as I have also indicated, most of these ratios fall outside of the benchmark ranges as set per industry norms. I mean, in this case, fair revenues should fall between, fair revenue as a direct operating cost should fall between 30 to 70%. While some of the cities, it is appreciated that they fell within that range. But most of the cities, like City of Joburg, for instance, if you check the last 3 years, one would ask questions in terms of what is happening with this system. I mean, ranging from 14 to 19% of this ratio, which is way, way outside of the acceptable range. Nelson Mandela, same thing. I mean, we saw between 2017-18 and 2018-19, the ratio fell within the acceptable range, but over time it sort of like goes out, and it raises a big question on the credibility of the system and how the system is run if these numbers can change quite drastically over time and there is no consistency at all. While other cities, like smaller cities like Polokwane and Rustenburg, are still at the first phases of implementation, this is worth looking into over time in terms of how they perform regarding such key financial ratios of the system. And again, I mean, these ratios that fall outside of these ranges suggest an ongoing operational inefficiency and a weak financial sustainability across all the cities. Next slide. And again, I mean, the grant itself was meant to, or designed to cover 70% of the indirect operating costs in the first 2 years of the operating phases of the system, and 50% thereafter. And across the cities, we are not seeing that. The numbers continue to fall outside of the range, and this suggests heavy reliance in terms of the grant itself. And cities are not taking their space in terms of what they should be covering in terms of the costs that arise as a result of the implementation of the system. I mean, as we can see, reported figures across the cities fall outside of the 50 to 70% benchmark range. Next slide.
So, honorable members, despite seeing all of these challenges in the numbers, I mean, we also knew quite early on in the operating phases that there was going to be a problem. So in 2014, and based on the 2014 budgets that we had received, and at the time, only Cape Town and Johannesburg were operating, we already saw some variation here that told us that something about the efficiency and the sustainability of this program was going to be a challenge. So firstly, in relation to what we had projected would be covered from FAIRS to cover the direct operating costs was at 70%, 72%. The actual experience for these two cities at the time was less than half of that. And that fair revenue as a percentage of our total costs would be a lot higher than what it actually came into. So we had projected, and the plans that these cities had was that they would cover 35% of their total cost from fair revenue. It was a lot lower, and it came in at 22%. At this stage was when we had the two separate grants, and when we looked at the Public Transport Network Operations Grant as a percentage of total costs, again, we projected that this was going to be higher than what it was. That suggested that the denominator here was higher than what we thought it was going to be here. And that the cities were going to have to cover some of these costs, and there was an acknowledgement that the cities were going to have to cover these costs. And what this showed was that cities were going to have to cover more than we thought they would need to cover. So fundamentally, what we were doing is we were building cities into, if they continued with this program in the way that they had continued, they would be building themselves into real financial trouble in relation to what it is that they could do here. Over to you, Leola.
Thanks, DDG.
Guys, if you can narrow towards concluding, yeah.
Thank you, Honorable Chair.
I'm not saying you must leave other details, but I'm saying your presentation, you must be summative towards you must summative towards conclusion. Yeah.
Okay, so Chair, we have two slides where we want to two slides where we want to show, maybe three slides where we want to show some important numbers. Leola, so just summarize your next three about important ones in here, so we don't have to go into the details, but and then we can then just get to the concluding slide.
Thanks, DDG. I mean, here, Chair, we are seeing significant variations in terms of the compensation to the minibus taxi industry. The top table talks to the compensation that was paid. You will see that there are gaps in terms of the information we have. The middle table shows the number of licenses compensated, and the last table just shows the average cost. So what you are seeing there, for instance, in Mangaung says it paid 27.2 million in 2021-22, but there were no licenses paid, and resulting in a zero sort of like average cost. And again, if you look at City of Tshwane in 17-18, 112 million was paid. Again, nothing is showing under the number of licenses paid. So it does bring this question of data discrepancies and not having a full picture of what is happening within the grant. Again, here, looking at the fair revenue collected in relation to the FAIR systems, some of the cities, for instance, I can't see at the bottom here, but I do know that Rustenburg and Polokwane, the fair revenue collected is actually less than the FAIR systems operations and maintenance, suggesting that the cities are actually generating less revenue and also maintaining systems that are actually taking more than what the city is actually generating, which brings a question of sustainability of the system going forward if cities are actually collecting less. This one here talks to the PTNG not paying for the direct operating costs, which should be covered by the municipal property rates. And these are just the percentages where it's showing that 5%, for instance, Cape Town, an average of 5.4 to 7% should be coming from the property rates from the municipality to cover for the direct vehicle operating costs. And I mean, if you look at George, I mean, George has received significant sums of money from the province to assist the system and make sure that the system is operational. And over time, City of George has received over, I think in the last financial year, they received 263 million from the province to support the city in covering the operational cost and other bus operating and long-term sustainability implementation.
Okay, so Chair, we won't do the slide as the Department of Transport covered it. And then just this is the last slide, Chair. I think what's important to understand in the context of trying to create a single transport fund is that there's this key necessary conditions that have to be met institutionally and legislatively. The first is that public transport, the funding is fragmented because the functions are fragmented. You have rail at national, you have some of these old order bus subsidies at provincial, you have regulatory functions at provincial, and then you have these integrated public transport networks at the local level. And whilst the NLTA does provide some guidance on how you can devolve some of these functions, it still creates this fragmented response around who's the contractor in the definitions in the NLTA, and then also where this regulatory environment, where the regulatory system sits in the context of where planning happens. So becoming an enforcement, when it comes down to enforcement, it's a real difficult problem. Then, of course, we can't talk about what's going to happen in the system without talking about what do we do about the minibus taxi industry. And one way of talking about this is how you consolidate the taxi recap. But as we now learned through this program, that a lot of this is about operations and how you contract for operations, how you enforce conditions around all of that, and how you monitor performance. The last one, Chair, is really around our challenges around public transport being so expensive and how this program became so unaffordable was because our spatial layout isn't designed to deal with mass transit systems like it is in other parts of the world. Part of this is exacerbated by an apartheid spatial legacy, and on top of that, a low-income housing program that has built on the periphery. And to deal with all of these issues, you have to look at how to make public transport more affordable. Is you have to look at what happens in low-income housing, in public transport and land use management, because the things that makes public transport cheaper is really a function of land use more than it is about building more transport. And the last component around all of this is the relationship between private and public transport, and whether in private transport, road users pay for the full cost to the economy versus what it is, and the externalities that they create versus what we then have in the public transport space that doesn't level the playing field. And that is where we end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would want members to come in and ask questions, and I'll be the last to ask questions. In that order, honorable members, here is the presentation. If you can come in and then ask questions, and then we'll then be able to take it from there. Honorable Ghana. Honorable Ghana, Honorable Nkopane. In that order, others will come. Honorable Vilakazi. Yeah, let's start Honorable Khan. Will be followed by Honorable Vilakazi, then Honorable Nkopane.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank very much for the messages of congratulations and good luck, the responsibility that we have to execute on behalf of the people of this country. So I want to check, and one, appreciating that there's still a lot of consultation that needs to be done. Insofar as the winding down is concerned. So what I will want to understand, maybe the minister, it's when we have accepted that there's capacity challenges in most of these municipalities, both yourself and Treasury have accepted this. And what I'm not getting clear from both the presentation is to say, in these 3 years, having identified this problem of capacity at the municipal level, and the feeling that the grant itself is not performing, and there's money that has been set aside. What is being done to ensure that the billions that are going to be pumped into the next 3 years, the 3 years of the, let's assume that the winding down does actually happen in 3 years, that it will happen. How are we addressing these capacity issues and the issues around the spending? Just to get that particular sense first. Secondly, and it is to the point around, let's call it some kind of uncertainty. By their nature, buses, there will be buses that will need to be replaced between now and 3 years. Let's say there are buses that were bought 5-6 years ago that will go out of service. And when the municipalities have to procure new buses, that in itself, it's a new term. So is the thinking, and just to get an understanding, is the thinking that from henceforth, there should not be further commitments outside of the commitments that are known. So municipalities been informed that you are not to commit yourself in anticipation that there will be money into this grant in the beyond the 3 years. And what does that do to the buses that will need to be replaced, buses that needs to be maintained, and so forth? The two last questions. If I look in terms of the commitments beyond the 3 years that already municipalities have, and this is linked to the second question, the municipalities have already made commitment beyond the 3 years. Is the anticipation that the new grant that you are trying to then establish, the single transport fund, that it will then carry those commitments into beyond the MTF, and what will then that work in terms of capacitating the municipalities? Because for me, it's not the capacity does not become inadequate on account that there are multiple grants, unless the analysis is that this capacity is caused by the existence of multiple fragmented grants as it was used. Even if it was a single grant, municipalities will not miraculously have that capacity that's required to administer this. And finally, when we went to KZN, eThekwini in particular, it became clear, at least to me, that there's still a significant part of infrastructure that might still need to be completed to just run that service, because the infrastructure is not complete in that particular municipality. If this grant is cut, or it's wound down in the new transport grant, and when I listen carefully, it feels like moving away from infrastructure to operational in terms of the new grant might actually impact the incomplete infrastructure projects. And when you drive in Cape Town, you see those highways that are hanging because they were not completed. There are those highways that just are hanging, just end in the middle of the highway. Some of them you don't know where they were going. Are we not running the risk of having these unfinished infrastructure projects that we look back and say, maybe the best idea would have been to finish the infrastructure and actually repurpose the operation from buying these expensive buses to buying normal buses? I will rest here, Chairperson, just to ensure that at least Minister has got the time to respond to some of the questions, and Treasury can also respond. Thank you very much.
Hakansa Mshabshik, Hakansa, Honorable Villagas.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all the colleagues on the call. I will start with two overall observations, Chair. The one thing that's stuck in my mind was that the presentation speaks a lot. The departmental presentation highlights the fact that these projects, these infrastructure grants, started with a focus on infrastructure, and now the department is moving more towards operations and number of riders, that being the driving focus for forward planning, which makes a lot of sense. But I just wanted to say that to me, this, excuse me, starting with infrastructure, which has largely, much of which has gone unused, such as in eThekwini, is a typical example of solution-based problem solving instead of problem-based problem solving, where you identify what the issue is first and then solve that issue. Here, we came, the department and Treasury came with a solution only to find that it was not appropriate for the problem at hand. So that's the one observation. Second observation is just the openness, the frank nature of the presentation, in that the department is quite open about the challenges and really its own failures, which is commendable. Understand? I mean, in many instances, you find departments wanting to shield themselves or to hide away from blame. As it were. And in fact, it's not the first time I've seen this in a Department of Transport presentation. So that's commendable. On the other hand, I feel that the department, though, kind of puts the blame on municipalities. And whereas the presenter stated that the role of the department is that of coordination and management of these various grants, and therefore, truthfully, the buck stops with the department and National Treasury too. And so the story of these funds, that particularly this fund, is one of a failure of accountability and responsible stewardship at the national level of government. And I feel, Minister, that this is a strong indictment on the government. And the fact that such failures, while commendable, can be reported in this manner, while commendable, but it also just how you can speak confidently and seemingly how officials can speak confidently and seemingly without a sense of contrition points to the culture of poor performance that has been inculcated in the departments across government. There's just no consequence management, and officials can report poor performance and go on to enjoy bonuses and businesses as usual, which to me needs to be addressed. And I wonder if the minister would have any comments on that. And then just a few questions. The department states that municipalities repeatedly failed to comply with grant conditions, yet funding continued for years. What motivated the department and the National Treasury, especially, in fact, to continue funding this program in spite of challenges? Going back as far as 2014, we heard. And then question two, the department cites municipal incapacity as a key reason for winding down the grant. Why was municipal capacity not treated as a prerequisite for receiving PTNG funding from the beginning, instead of it being identified as this problem that's resulting in poor delivery? And a worrying factor, I think, for all of us here should be the fact that the department reports more than 32 billion rand in current and future contractual commitments, especially in the current fiscal environment that South Africa finds itself in. Now, I just want to know how much of this exposure is legally unavoidable and how much could potentially be renegotiated, and what is the estimated cost of terminating these contracts or of litigation. And let me see. My next question would be, the new proposed model consolidates these various grants, PTNG, PTOG, TRP, into a single fund. Now, noting what has happened in the instance of these various other grants, what safeguards will ensure that the new fund does not simply inherit the governance weaknesses, poor planning and compliance failures that affected the PTNG? And of the 6 transition risks identified by the department, which risk is considered the most likely and most severe? And what mitigation processes are being put in place to avoid its manifestation? And then finally, the department proposes an operations-led model while infrastructure remains located in other grants. One of the reasons we are doing this is to avoid fragmentation, according to the presentation. But how will planning, budgeting, and accountability be coordinated across these various new streams now to avoid recreating this very fragmentation that the department identifies as a key weakness of the current system? And finally, just an observation on the presentation, on the department presentation on slide 18, the columns say the amounts are expressed in thousands, and then the amounts themselves have the letter M besides them saying they are expressed in millions. So there's a bit of a confusion there. So I wasn't sure whether we're reading billions, we're reading hundreds of millions. Therefore, the table, because the table mixes its units, it would be a good idea for the department to correct that and just ensure that units are uniform, especially on one table. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Vilakazi, Honorable Nkopane, if you can come in.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Good morning to you and my colleagues, all of them, including the Minister and the DM. Chair, I've got quite a number of questions, but I think I'll only focus on 4 of those questions. Chair, how will the department ensure that non-operational cities like eThekwini, Msunduzi, who have been there, they do not simply transfer PTNG underspend to other grants without improving outcomes? Then the second question would be, what specific legal advice has been received regarding early termination of VOC and AFC system contracts, and what is the estimated liability? The third one, Chair, how will you prevent stranded infrastructure, e.g., the BRT stations, the depots, dedicated lanes, from becoming fruitless and wasteful expenditure during the wind down? And also, we wouldn't want to see ourselves being labeled as the ones that have established white elephants during the democratic period of government. Then my last question, Chair, would be what mechanisms will be put in place to protect daily commuters in cities like Cape Town, where we find that about 20 million commuters are moved annually? So now, if these services are reduced or cancelled before the new fund is operational, what are we thinking about those daily commuters that would be left there stranded, and also wondering what is going to happen, will be put in place to protect them? Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Malmata, you are the last on this subject.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me to take this opportunity and greet yourself, the team led by the minister. I think you covered me when you congratulate Mr. Ghana. Chair, the objective was to improve the infrastructure and the operation. And I want to agree with the evidence on the ground that in many cases we do things that are very good. And the outlook remains good. If you go to Bologwane, whatever has been there, regardless of what has been collected in a form of revenue, that city has benefited a lot and it continues to benefit. In Ekurhuleni, you pass along Phumuloni from Isando, Captain Park, that city looked beautiful. Now, one will say on the presentation, there is some quite significant loopholes that one will really need to have been clarified. For an example, lack of municipal buy-in evidence, the timeline show workshop and bilateral engagements. That will prove or indicate whether the cities support the wind down. I mean, their cooperation is essential given the large passenger volumes. I'm saying without that, Chair, sometimes it really leaves us with some questions. The other one will be lack of qualified evidence. No, the presentation states poor return on investment, funds wasted, but provide no financial figures. This weakens the case for winding down. And of more important is the issue of stakeholder impact assessment. While risks are mentioned, there's no analysis of how commuters, especially the income user who rely on IPTN, will be affected during or after the transition to Chair. If these are not really hindered out, one will think that all is well and good. Chair, what independent monitoring or parliamentary oversight will be in place during the 3-year transition to ensure reductions are managed without service collapse or contract breaches? How will the de-risking, as I said earlier, of minibus taxis be funded? And what guarantees exist that formulation does not simply create VOC-style capacity problems? I think I'm clear there, sir. What happened to municipalities that refuse to wind down or fail to submit an acceptable implementation plan for the new regime, which is not far from what I was telling you earlier on? And lastly, Chair, how will the new road-based transport fund avoid the same municipal capacity constraints? You'll have high turnoff, weak planning that undermine PTNGs. And thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Malmaja. Thank you very much. I think there are two things which are important that has been raised by members here, which is a collective sum of the concerns that are there. One is that Ministry of Transport and mainly Treasury is that, and I think it's what all members are saying, there has not been a sufficient or enough oversight on this project, especially Treasury. We had you presenting the numbers here and all that, what should have happened and what didn't happen. But the begging question is, what did you do until now, such that we find ourselves in this situation? Because you can't abdicate that particular responsibility. You ought to tell us, when we saw ABC, we did ABC. And just for example, If you look in Msunduzi, we have spent a lot of money there and there's nothing that really happened on the ground. Now, the question that you ought to be answering, that you will be telling us, in as far as Msunduzi, this is the steps that we have taken. When we suspended together with National Transport, these are the type of intervention that we have made. And for Msunduzi to come on board, the window that we have been created, these are the quality checks that we have. I don't see that coming right. But nonetheless, why this question is important, it has to do with the future now, because we can't dwell on the past. The fact is, this program has not reached its intended outcome, and we agree with the ministry that we can continue to pump the money into something which is not working. The question that we must answer now is, in the midst of that failed oversight that we should have provided from where we are seated, what is it that you're going to do from the Treasury point of view, even from Ms. Kibi, from your point of view as transport? What is it at this point that you are putting on table to ensure that as we move forward, this program does not have similar challenges that that would have had in the past? Because like we're saying, the implication here would have been around how best do we provide about monitoring and oversight. Now, that's the type of assurance that we may need to say when we come with this future plan that has been presented here. From the Treasury point of view, these are the things that we'll be doing. From transport point of view, this is what we'll be doing. I think if we can just quickly come on that and be able to take us into confidence there, we'll then be able to take it forward.
Can I respond, Chair?
Yes, Honorable Minister, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to thank all the honourable members for the important questions that have been raised in this discussion today. You know, Chair, I think that this is an extremely difficult situation for any public representative to face. And it's difficult because there is no doubt that this grant has significantly underperformed over a very long period of time. And I would want to admit, even if I wasn't there, because I am a successor at law, that it can't be acceptable for a public funded grant, a grant that is funded by taxpayers' money. It can't be acceptable that it can underperform for almost 20 years. And yeah, it's not acceptable. I suppose the issue that has confronted me in my position is, do I continue to do the same things and get the same results, or do I try to change the situation? And I think we all know the definition of continuing with the same things and getting the same results. We all know what that's the definition of. So I think that this is what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to change it. I think the great complexity that we face in trying to change it is that it's not easy to unscramble an egg. And I think that both National Treasury and our department have explained to you the difficulties that we face in trying to unscramble this egg. And when one is trying to unscramble an egg, I think it's very important to start with principles. And my first principle would be that we do need to put commuters at the center. of what we do. Because what we understand is whatever the difficulties that there are with our spatial development and so on and so forth, we need to put commuters and the suffering that commuters are facing at the center. Because we all know the research that indicates the percentage that South African commuters versus commuters in other developing countries of a similar economic status. We all know that research that indicates that South African commuters are spending far more of their income than their counterparts in other developing countries on transport. The second issue is that whatever the weaknesses are of the integrated transport plans that exist, we have to put those integrated transport plans at the center of how we try to reconceptualize this grant. So we have to be saying, how do cities and understand how they are going to be moving commuters, and how do we support that conceptualization? And what I think we're going to have to confront is that one size won't fit all. I think the Honorable Vilakazi made the point that this was a solution-orientated solution, not a problem-orientated solution. And I think that what that means is that we have to have flexibility for different situations. So cities like Cape Town and Johannesburg with very dense commuter areas are different from cities like Mangaung and Mbombela and others, where you would find that commuters are situated in very spatially removed areas from the main city center as a result of essentially apartheid planning. So I think that however we redesign this process, it's got to be flexible so that it can accommodate different situations. Thirdly, we mustn't fix what's not broken. So if we find in certain areas that systems are working, there's no reason not to incorporate those systems. But where those systems are not working and there's a proven track record that they're not working, then I think that we would need to be prepared to move away from those systems. We have to honor valid contracts. That's just basic law. We have to honor valid contracts. I think with regard to all the questions about are we doing this, are we doing that, the consultation is not finished. And it's a broad consultation process. I myself am meeting Salga in the next couple of weeks. You've heard from the Deputy Director General all of the consultation processes that are undergoing. And I don't think we can commit ourselves in this meeting to say, we are going to buy new buses, we're not going to buy new buses, we are doing this, we are not doing that. We can't make those commitments in this meeting because the consultation process is not finished. And lastly, I think that it's very easy for all of us to point fingers at different levels of government. My own experience of being in government, I've been in executive office since 2004. And my own experience is that when one deals with programs that run across national, provincial, and local government, those are the most difficult programs to operate. And they are difficult to operate because there are varying capacities across different levels of government. They are also difficult to operate because they are different regulatory environments, but also because national government can't just come in and start to point fingers. And well, pointing fingers is easy, but actually taking over is not something that national government can do. And I think we're seeing this with regard to a range of complexities that we face in the intergovernmental sphere. So, colleagues, I really would want to to say that these are the principles that guide us in the work that we're doing, and where we go to from here really depends on the consultation process that we are getting into. And I think that what is becoming increasingly clear to us is that we can't answer some of the immediate questions. I mean, colleagues are asking, what about the 32 billion that's already committed? We can't answer some of those questions without beginning to understand where we're going to in the future. And I think that's why you would have heard the DDG saying that we're trying to speed up the consultation process so that we can get a really big picture idea about where we're going to going forward. Obviously, the oversight of the portfolio committee is not in the domain of our department. We are always guided by the portfolio committee, and I think that we have no problem reporting to you regularly on how this process is panning out, because we think that this is an issue that should be of concern to everybody, because it's all about how we move commuters more effectively and how we increase mobility in our transport ecosystem. So I think, Chairperson, we would have no problem with regular reporting. Allow me to pause there. I'm sure Treasury and our department would want to talk about some of the questions. But as I say, we can't give certainty on the future. But Chair, can you then allow me to excuse myself and to thank honourable members for giving us this opportunity to brief you on this very difficult situation that we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. You are free to go. We'll remain with the Treasury and Transport colleagues. I've not acknowledged the DM. I've seen that the DM is also in the meeting. Yeah? Greetings to Honourable Chama. But we'll release you, Minister. Morning. Yeah, Minister, you feel free.
I didn't see DM was here. DM, I'm handing over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, transport, colleagues from Treasury, come in.
Thank you, Chair. I think Minister gave a very fitting response for us from the Department of Transport. I think we note some of the comments that have been made in terms of the slide. I think it was slide 8. We will correct. I think the total amounts are in billions. Of course, the amounts, some of the amounts that are against certain municipalities are either billions or in millions. So I think we'll go back and correct that. I also just think that there was also another comment around reflecting on the lessons. There's been a lot of lessons that we have learned from having implemented the program over the past years, and this is actually documented in a review program that we did. And so going forward, we will make sure that the lessons learned are incorporated in whatever fund we will develop. But I think largely, as Minister has said, We're still engaging with municipalities, and I think the principles that she highlighted are important in guiding us on how we will navigate this winding down process. So I think, Chair, it's best that I then submit and leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. So I think one of the important things that we've learned out of this process, and it actually came out of the various reviews that we have done as part of the budget, relates to understanding what it is we do in the budget and what it buys. So as I had said in my introductory slides, when the budget process became one that was incremental, it was just the inertia from the previous year's allocations that then went forward. And when we changed track into understanding what this is buying us, we then got to the point where we looked into these details around what this money was buying us. So on the one hand, you have the public transport network grant that funds a specific program. So then it was looking at the performance of this program in a way that we've never done before as part of the 2025, after what happened in the 2025 budget, and us then changing track in how we're thinking about how we manage the budget process. So we had significant reforms that we introduced. The big one was the targeted and responsible savings. And this program then gets subjected in this way that we're doing this with other programs, gets subjected in all of this that allows us to then understand what it is that we're buying and what it is that we are not buying. We've also done various reviews, I mean, on specific programs. We've just completed the review around the conditional infrastructure grants, and one of the mechanisms and one of the things that came out of that program, out of that review, was that there's this, we had an overemphasis on spending performance and not necessarily on the quality of the spending. So a lot of this, the incentives that and the way the grant system is designed was one that looks at focus on spending, and the incentives were all skewed in that way. So grant frameworks were written in a way that got to the department, that incentivizes departments to transfer money, as opposed to ensuring that you have the right levers in there that attracts the right kind of performances in that. So as we embark, I mean, on a continuous budget reform process, I mean, so we're starting off with the targeted and responsible savings. We have various infrastructure budgeting reforms on the go. The next phase would also be looking at what happens with these conditional grants and how we make our conditional grants work better. And this may also mean in how we kind of centralize some of this. We've done that, for example, in the municipal infrastructure grant. So where we go into and what it is that we're doing around all of this relates to all the reforms that ensures that as part of our broader fiscal objectives, that it's understanding what we already have in the baselines and whether that is working. How we create the fiscal space would be closing down the programs that don't work, recalibrating what we need to recalibrate to still meet our objectives, or just close down programs and institutions in the way that the analysis shows. So, Chair, we've from the work that we've done last year, the point is that there's a big budget reform agenda that would allow us to have better signaling and early warning systems that allows us to track where the performance goes, what's happening on performance beyond just financial performance. Then just to answer your question on what did we do? Again, back to the introductory slide, one of the things that we would do when we see these kinds of things is we cut the budget. And when we cut budgets, we hope that the system responds in a way that then redefines the programs that those budgets pay for. And it hasn't happened, which is why we're taking the approach around targeted and responsible savings, doing a program assessment matrix in a more systematic way that would allow us to do this. But historically, I mean, this is a program, a grant that has seen consistent cuts in the budget over the years. When we did the suspensions in 2018, that was on the back of doing a large cut on the budget. The approach then was to say that instead of cutting all the cities, there were cities that was just in perpetual planning, and they then get suspended from the program. And that was the response around all of that. And that's really how you want to deal with all of this. So as we kind of evolve into the next layer of targeted and responsible savings, the first is the PTNG. The second is then, in the way that Ms. Manana explained, is in systematically looking at each of those cities and then looking at what you have to do there in a targeted way. The focus here will always be in a targeted manner around all of this. We also have, just in relation to kind of capacity support, one of the things that we have done is, for example, was the capacity support that we brought in, when was this, in 2013, 2014, that allowed us to formulate an annexure, that Appendix 3 that we used as the analysis. And that was done through the city support program, for example, that would allow us to standardize what it is we were seeing, that would enable us to benchmark and then build the body of knowledge around all of that. Just in relation to, I mean, the Minister and Ms. Manana covered where we're going to from here, but I do think that it's important for us to also just understand how the budgeting and the fiscal system works. I'm always tempted to start with, in the first version of the Public Finance Management Act that was printed, the Minister of Finance at the time was Minister Manuel, and in the foreword, he wrote that one of the objectives of the Public Finance Management Act, that included things like modernizing public finances and all of that, was that we've designed the system in a way that you allow program managers to manage and you hold them accountable for their management decisions. So the way the Appropriation Act works, the powers and functions that we have for national accounting officers that's set up in the Public Finance Management Act, in the Division of Revenue Act, the responsibilities of national transferring officers, the responsibilities of provincial and municipal receiving officers, all set out what everybody needs to do to make the system work in a way that managers are able to manage their programs. And then in that way, I mean, we have some mechanisms that the Treasury has that we're able to use, but a lot of that sits within each of those managers' ambit, the accounting officers, the executive officers that they have, and ultimately Parliament, on how we deal with when things go wrong around all of this. But as Ms. Manana said, the work continues, the consultation continues. We're using the city support program, and we're relying on the city support program that we have to continue with the capacity building work, to source in expertise globally that would then help us frame how we take this forward. Just in relation to just kind of managing of assets and liabilities and all of that, and what happens here. I mean, if the reality is that in some cases we have stranded assets and we have these sunk costs, we will acknowledge all of that as we recalibrate this and go forward with a new vision for what public transport needs to look like. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any addition from your colleague?
I'm covered, Chair. Thank you. I'm covered by my DDG.
You are covered, Chair. Can I establish from my members here if you are all covered?
On my side, I'm covered, Chair.
Honorable Ghana, you're fine? Your question has been covered. Honorable Vilagazi, if you can just point to where you are not, where you have not been answered.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, excuse me, I was thinking about this point that I do feel that the questions could have been better addressed. I understand the minister's viewpoint is global. She sits at the top as the overall authority. However, we have officials here who are the technocrats that are running this work. And I think to just say it's been covered by what the minister said. I'm thinking here, Chair, it wasn't my question, but a question I was looking forward to hearing the answer to is, one of the members asked, how will we protect users, commuters, from any disturbance in regard to the change. The minister, in her response, said, we will put the customer at the center, we will put the traveler at the center of whatever it is that we do. But that's fine for the minister. But we are here to find out how the department is is thinking about rolling out this new fund, or restructuring or transforming this fund. And so it would have been helpful for us to hear, okay, yes, we're putting the passenger at the center, and here's how we are doing it in regard to the fact that we know now that we are going ahead with the change. But here's what we are going to do to ensure the passengers are not adversely affected, even though we don't have the final results. And there were other such questions. There was a question around how come funds continue to be dispersed in spite of shortcomings. In spite of shortcomings in performance. The Treasury response did go towards saying, here's how the oversight process works within Treasury, but we didn't hear that within the department. So I just think, Chair, that leaving responses to specific questions under the banner of the minister saying that this is still a developing project, in a way, almost is seeking to escape accountability, or at the very least, it's leaving us in the dark as MPs and people who are responsible for holding the department to account in terms of knowing what it is that the department is planning to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Bulagazi. I needed to afford everyone an opportunity, not necessarily to raise new questions, but just for everyone who might have had this question not answered. And of course, including like you've done, those concerns that would have raised, they are noted. The Honorable the DM, maybe before we go to finality, because you are here and Ms. Kibi is here, Ms. Manana is here, you may want to say your part in short, and maybe throw us to close with the answer to the question that says, because the minister would have said you are still on a formative stage in as far as this, when are we likely to have something solid, formidable, and when can you brief us on something that you are saying, now we're taking this direction, we are going to roll it out, something to that effect, so that we know what we're going to be monitoring about?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning to the colleagues. Well, I would want to maybe start off by reiterating what you have said, Chairperson, which is the intro we have given, that this is a work in progress. And first things first is to arrest a situation where we are clearly throwing financial solutions to non-financial challenges. And that there is a need, therefore, to restructure for the purposes of optimized financial expenditure on the part of government. And that is why in the budget vote, we would have indicated that we are working towards a reconfigured grant system within the transport sector. You will recall that part of this has included the repurposing of the taxi recapitalization program, wherein we are working towards de-risking and engaging with financial institutions and the taxi industry itself. So it's a clear outlook to say how best can funds be used maximally and yield results to the benefit of commuters and the taxpayer. So, Chair, I think broadly then is to say and reiterate what Minister has also indicated in her response. We are consulting SALGA on this. We have in fact at a broad scale established a SALGA working group under auspices of COCTA amongst others, where we can be able to engage with some of these issues. And lastly is then that we have got contractual obligations that it's elementary that we must actually honor and fulfill as part of the winding down process. So you could say Chair, that this is a dual process. You need to continue with your obligations and wind down, on the other hand, towards the reconfiguration that we are working towards. So we can progressively, a chairperson at your behest, maybe at a quarter by quarter basis, report to the portfolio committee on progress that we are making and on areas wherein we are at any point. So the question then would be, rather the answer to the question you raised in terms of when we can do that, this would be progressive, Chair, and I think it may be to the benefit of the portfolio committee if we report back progressively as we work towards all of this. I think what must be in appreciation, Chair, is we are settled with a situation where the funds may be ordinarily available, but they are not yielding the kind of results that we want. And that's not to the benefit of the taxpayer. And that's not to the benefit of the consumer, because what we want is an integrated transport system which works across the ecosystem. Now, that will then ultimately mean that there's no end to grants, but maybe there's an end to how they are currently being implemented. And that is why we are working towards a reconfigured public transport grant, which will include the areas that colleagues have raised. So, Chair, we are in your hands. As you know, as and when we are called, we are always readily available to appear before the portfolio committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister. Thanks very much. I think, Treasury, you have a parting shot so that I don't sideline you. Briefly, do you have something?
No, thank you, Chair. I think we've covered it all. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to present to you the work that we've been doing on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate, colleagues, that you came. The Minister, the Deputy Minister, Ms. Manana, and the entire team from Transport, the entire team of Treasury, and honorable members of Portfolio Committee on Transport. I really want to thank you for having come and provided this particular brief. This matter is a matter of serious interest by the people of South Africa, because despite the failure of this particular program, the intention has always been good, and to address a very important issue of moving our people in cities. So we appreciate the brief and the intention thereof that you are having to say, as much as you are scaling down, you have a plan on what must happen. This is what must then happen now as we move forward, is that by the end of Q3, we would then request both of you, Treasury and National Department of Transport, to come and then present to us how far you have went, because now you are saying the report is the plan is at the formative stage, you are testing this or that. Now, as we'll be moving also, that will be towards a process towards the new adjustment budget. And one strongly believe that at that particular time, you would have figured out on how this is going to work. But the most important thing that we say is that we shouldn't have ever lost so much money as a nation and as a people. And surely you should be able to do things better as we move forward, especially at the level of monitoring, oversight, and ensuring that we speedily intervene where there are challenges. What we have seen in Msunduzi, what we have seen in other parts, including Rustenburg of this country, is not things that we must tolerate as a people. Just from yourself, honorable colleagues from the department and from Treasury, and even ourselves, these are not the things we must be proud of. And we can't be talking as if it was just a thing that happened and we have lost small money. No. We have lost serious monies that went down the drain, and we should be worried. And any other program and intervention that we're making as we move forward must be to ensure that such a ugly hit must never rear itself into the public resources. We must never have such an ugly past as a mark in our resources as we move forward. And to this effect, we want to thank you for that. We'll hear from you at that particular time that I spoke about, at least by the end of the third quarter, so that we know if we are coming or going. At the end of the day, the message is, in whatever we do, our commuters, our people must continue to be at the center of our plans. Thanks very much. You are officially released from this meeting.
Long live the chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, the Honorable the DM. Thank you, Ms. Manana.
Thank you, Chair.
Members must remain a bit. Thank you, everyone. Members must remain, Honorable Vilagazi, so that we can quickly process the minutes.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to jump in here. The first set of minutes is the 5th of May. That was when we looked at the department's budget or the report, the committee's report. Then also the responses from the department regarding the Western Cape Network on Disability, where the minister indicated that there was a court matter, and then minutes. Those were the members that were present. In the introduction was where the indication came from chairperson's side regarding that letter from the minister about the court case. We considered the report, the budget report, and the amendments that were proposed were noted and made and reflected in the document. And then we adopted a number of minutes. So that was the minutes of 5 May. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alma. There is a set of minutes of the 5 May colleagues. Any mover? Any correction?
Thank you, Chair. I was part of that move. I stand to agree with this minutes as I move for the adoption of it.
Thank you very much. Can I get a second? Second?
Nkupani moves to second the adoption of the minutes, supporting Honorable Malimache. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Set of minutes adopted. Next set of minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The next one is the 12th of May. That very quick one on the adoption of the ASIP report. So those were our members present. Indicating the discussion with the select committee, the consideration of the report and the adoption thereof. So very short set of minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That was the shortest meeting, I think, one of those shortest meetings that we had. Mover.
I
Mover
move.
one. Honorable Vilagazi moves. Adopt. Second.
Chair, I stand to second the move.
Thanks very much, Honorable Malmaja. Last set of minutes.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chair.
Honorable Gama.
Our last set is also the other short one on the TEC. So our members present, again, the select committee's consultation, the consideration and adoption of that report, and the adjournment. 26 May's minutes. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Alma. This was the shortest minute of meeting, also straightforward. Mover.
Nkupane moves for the adoption of the minutes, Chair.
I second, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kopane and Honorable Vilakazi. There's a problem with Honorable Gama's mic. Honorable Gama, I'm not sure whether it's your gadget now or it's our system. You may have to, because even in the previous meeting, you was unable to speak. You may have to liaise with Valerie after here so that we see if the problem is our systems or it's about your system. I think I really sympathize with you. Or it's your gadget. Okay, no, it's fine. If it's your gadget, it's fine. Just find a way of fixing it. But I know that you wanted also to second the adoption of the set of minutes. Colleagues, as may have noted it before, we're going to have a joint study group on Friday, joint portfolio committee on Friday with Home Affairs on matters. Home Affairs requested that we meet with BMA, Border Management Agency, and we meet with CBRTA at the background of the current continuing reported accidents of foreign buses that carry unregistered foreigners or people who are not properly registered to be in the country, who are getting to die on our roads with so much damage to our country. So there was an agreement that because the Home Affairs was proposing that we must have it today, and we had our own scheduled meeting for today. The meeting has been approved now. I'm informed that it has been duly approved by the House Chair for Friday. It will be a fiscal meeting. We plead on all members to be available because the current developments in the country relating to matters of foreigners are also bordering on the work of our committee. So it will be important to understand what is the CBRTA doing at the border, and also to understand what BMA doing in their interfaces together with other agencies and forces that are located in our ports of entries into the Republic, especially the Mozambique, South Africa border, the Zimbabwe, South Africa border, Botswana, South Africa border, which have been having, especially the Beit Bridge, which have been having creating a lot of problems and bad media coverage in as far as these bus accidents and unregistered foreigners in our buses. And therefore, it is going to be important for us to listen to them and get to understand what's happening on behalf of the people of South Africa, because that's the only way our people can have answers, because there are so much questions lingering in the heads of the people of South Africa so far as these developments are concerned, and we also don't have answers. So it will be important to take advantage of that Friday and interface with everyone and have answers. With this, colleagues, compatriots, can I call it a day?
Chair.
I've seen
excuse me, Chair. On the
Yes.
minutes of the 12th of May, I'm registered as absent or not there. But on the 12th of May, I was even debating in the House in the afternoon. How comes that I was not there in the committee meeting?
Can we do it this way? Can we, the 12th of May is one of those shortest meetings, nah? What we can do, we have approved the minutes, and therefore we'll revisit the minutes. So I'm reopening the minutes that we adopt them with you having verified indeed if you're in that meeting or not, and that we can do with the secretariat. And now those minutes are adopted subject to that verification. If indeed you were there, it will be corrected. If you were not there, it will be endorsed. Is that fine?
Yes, it's fine, Chair. Thank
Take
you.
it up with Valerie and Alma. Thanks very much. Colleagues, with this, the meeting is duly has duly reached its conclusion. And I want to thank you very much for having availed yourself to come here and we interface in this manner. Thanks very much. The meeting is closed. We meet in the house at 2.